We are now in post-COVID. We are now back a little bit more contact hours than we had during COVID, but not as much as we were before. So pre-COVID, we haven't reached again. That is the kind of the post-COVID world we're in right now for our teaching. I also want to bring up this professional development presentation that we had last fall, which was by members of our community who represented post-CPS. So Michael Lewis from SEDS, Carrie Paczynski from the Writing Center, and a former NUFIP student came back and did a professional development session with us. And one of the most important takeaways from that, I felt, was this idea of perusal. So the Writing Center uses perusal with their students to engage critically with texts. And even Michael Lewis said one of the most important things is getting students to read, and not just write before it's needed, but to read things over time and to return to texts and go back to those texts over and over again. And that spoke to me, and I thought, you know, I know perusal. I'm going to try and bring this into my class and see how it goes. So that's kind of the context. Okay, so the outline for my presentation is that I'm going to talk about critical reading and research, and I'm really only going to talk about one systematic review and what it has to say from 2022. Then I'm going to talk a little bit about the NUFIP academic reading course description. I'm going to talk about what I found by trying to use perusal in NUFIP. And I'm going to do brief SWOT analysis, although I'll do it a little bit out of order. So this is the article that I was looking at for a quick systematic review of what the literature says, particularly about the Eastern culture, how it applies to Eastern cultures. So in the next few slides, we'll talk about this. If you want, you can click on this. Use this QR code to open up the Padlet. And I think it's going to open for me here. There we go. So these are kind of my notes from that article, and I apologize that they might be a little bit difficult to see because the text is quite small, but you can access this Padlet yourself as well. So some of the key things that I wanted to bring up actually had to do with the same things that Liz Wilding spoke about this morning. This idea of constructive language through community, clarifying concepts via discussion and questions. The idea of increasing engagement, in-depth textual analysis, interpret textual meaning within the context of the location and purpose of the text. A critical evaluation of validity, analysis of assumptions in texts and own assumptions in reading the text, comparing, contrasting, connecting ideas in other texts and sources, and that critical reading is not passive, it's very active, okay? And then a critical response to texts as well. So those were like some of the key kind of what was involved in critical reading and what the components are for it. Some of the pedagogical approaches included things like authentic texts, the appropriacy, assessment, reading strategies, problem solving. They talked about translation, scaffolding between teacher and student, but also student to student. And again, engagement, and this not just engagement by reading, but by actively doing something like note-taking or underlining, etc. So they've offered several ideas here, but what is really interesting is this idea of critical literacy approach, because I'm going to return to the idea of literacy later, critical reading questions, multimodal tasks, and dynamic assessment, as well as computer-assisted language learning approaches. So this was 2022, which is, of course, still in the period of COVID instruction. So if we move on, oh, I need to go back to the presentation. Here we go. There we go. So when I implemented perusal, perusal markets itself by saying it increases student engagement. It is a collaborative social learning platform. It's multimodal. You can use reading text and videos and audio. And of course, it has this built-in analytics for assessment, right? It even has an AI detection tool built into it for student comments. This is the marketing. What did I find when I used it with my students? This is something very interesting. First of all, because at the time, I was looking to do an actual research study on it. And as I only teach one section of EAP and everybody else in the program teaches something else, when I sat down to do my ethics, it was brought to my attention that I had to make sure that how I was using Perusal wasn't changing the input that the students were receiving. So I basically had to take our lessons as they would have been delivered by everyone else and put them in Perusal. And what I found is it didn't work at all. Did not work at all. First of all, in terms of student engagement, only the most engaged actually even engaged at all with comments. They didn't go back to it multiple times. They didn't respond to each other's comments. They didn't, have a conversation in Perusal as it is used in the Writing Center. I also did not attempt to use the multimodality, and obviously assessment, that wasn't really an option for me because that wasn't something that was built into the program. So these are the things that Perusal measures when it's measuring engagement. Opening the assignment, reading until the end, active engagement time. So the number of times accessing, the time spent, comment quality, which we'll talk about next, getting responses from peers, upvoting, and quizzes. And I was really excited about all of these things. I thought, oh, this is great. This is great. This is not just about commenting, but giving quality comments and engaging with each other. So these are the comments. When they make comments, these are the things that Perusal looks for to see whether the students are doing. So clarifying ideas, connecting ideas to other texts or other things in life, extending beyond the course, etc., asking questions they can, and they can answer each other's questions. And above all, remain kind, polite, and respectful. Sounds wonderful, but again, the students didn't do this. So why? First of all, I'm going to talk about the strengths of what I figured out. So looking at the course description of our academic reading course in EAP, the description hits on a lot of the critical reading requirements, right? Which it should, because that's a major outcome. So the idea of critical evaluation of the text, reading strategies, large degree of independence, yes. Although, is it really something that then fits with critical reading if one of the tenets of critical reading is scaffolding and that collaborative meaning? Pre-reading and scanning academic texts is not really critical reading yet. That's very base. The author's purpose, intended audience, and the text's general context, yes, that's part of it. Support the thesis, the arguments. What are they using as evidence? Yes, that's part of critical reading. Critical evaluation of the evidence presented, the biases, the assumptions, etc. Good, that's critical reading. And identifying key vocabulary in text and clarifying its meaning in that specific context. Again, that's part of that definition of critical reading. So these are really good. These descriptors really match up. So great aspects are exposure to different types of academic texts. We use reports, we use academic journal articles, we use academic magazines like Nature, and various different types of academic texts. And this is excellent because that goes to the authentic aspect. We use themes in the first few weeks of semester 1 so that students can engage with some connection between texts and connecting the ideas between them. And of course, we have a range of assessments. This is not just our reading exams, but also our research project, our Viva exam, and really everything except for maybe the listening exam at the end of the year is tied to whether or not they have read and read critically. We, as part of our assessments, as part of our proposal, we have an annotated bibliography requirement, which makes the students evaluate the text as a source, defend it as an appropriate source for a research project, talk about what they're going to use from it, where, why, that sort of thing. So we do build in so many of the aspects into our assessment. So that is excellent. When I started to think about the weaknesses, though, I realized that a lot of our lessons were emphasizing skimming and scanning, which is a very rudimentary start to the texts. We were using what is called the KWL. So for those that are not familiar with it, it's a reading strategy. What do you know? What do you want to know? And what have you learned? Okay. And our leadership course, which is run parallel to EIP, uses the SQ4R method, which in looking at it, emphasizes to a large degree the idea of memorizing content for content courses, as opposed to critical evaluation and thinking and questioning of a text. So we also focus a lot on multiple choice question types. And we offer, compared to pre-COVID, we offer few opportunities, sorry for the typo, for scaffolded critical thinking discussion questions. So prior to COVID, we often would have a reading lesson that would then blend into a speaking lesson or more of an integrated skills lesson, where we would carry that reading on into the other skill and get students discussing it and debating it much more. We have a few like that, a few debate classes, but oftentimes it's taught by a different instructor. Then they don't necessarily connect the two, and they often come unprepared for their speaking class because it is a different lesson from the reading and writing. And we have a bit too much of an emphasis on one and done reading lessons. We read the text once, hopefully they've read it before they come to class, and that is a very big hopefully. But we often don't return to that text again because we're not content teachers. We are EAP teachers. But instead of looking at the fact that we have to return to the text over and over again to really emphasize that criticality, we are moving along, I think partly out of fear that we'll be accused of teaching content that we're not experts in. So as I said, I was doing this out of order. I'm going to look at the threats next. How am I doing for time? Am I speeding through this too quickly? Obviously, this past year, we have AI tools as probably the largest threat. Most people focus on generative AI, which writes for students, but AI is equally important when talking about critical reading because there is AI out there that reads for students. And I think we tend to focus more on the ChatGPT side, but there's these other ones like Chat PDF, My Reader, Ask Your PDF, which not only will summarize, but if you put a question in, it'll tell you exactly where in the text there might be an answer. What this means is that when we are counting on our research project to show that students have read and understood their topic, they're not reading around the ideas and finding out the complexity of the area. They're instead focusing on what do I want to prove? What is going to be my claim? Oh, here, I'm just going to pick this little piece, and it may not be representative of the entire paper, but I'm going to pick this little piece because it supports my argument as I already assume the answer is going to be. And so this takes out that idea of questioning their assumptions. You know, they go in thinking this is my thesis. But if they're not reading the research thoroughly, they're not questioning whether or not that thesis is fully supported. They're instead looking for ideas that support that thesis and cherry picking them. Okay, not all the students do this, but I found this year that I felt there were a lot more students who were really not thinking about the reading as a whole. And they would just say, but I have evidence. Yes, but that evidence isn't necessarily representative of the full picture. There's also tools like Unriddle, which replaces really important tools like Credo for finding dictionary, encyclopedia, Google searches for information beyond the text. So understanding specialty terms or concepts that are not fully explained in the text, instead of going to a recognized authoritative text, such as in the Credo database, they're using a tool like Unriddle, which just uses a ChatGPT style, this is what it is. And they don't question whether or not that is actually accurate, and they don't have the expertise to know. Then they have tools like Consensus, which will synthesize for them. So not just tell them where in the text it is, but we'll actually tell them, oh, use this from this text and this from this text, and here you go, here's a paragraph. Okay. And then there's tools like Jenny AI as well. We'll look at these a little bit more. So students know these things. We as teachers, I had to do an awful lot of preparation to really dig down the rabbit hole of AI tools for critical reading. I didn't know them, but I know my students do. Okay, and this doesn't even begin to talk about translation. So there are websites like there's an AI for that website that students can go to find out how can I use AI to do this for me. YouTube videos, and there's an example linked there, and unfortunately we don't have time to really look at the video today, but she walks students through how to write a paper with AI and claims without plagiarism. Of course, that depends on the definition of plagiarism, right? By our definition, it's definitely plagiarism. But she assumes students will have read the papers before she starts working with it, okay? But nonetheless, the students know these tools are out there, they know these links are out there, and they have figured it out much quicker than we have. Undetectable AI comes with a guarantee. It's a product. Discussion forums and websites with hints, lists of vocabulary. Our students use Telegram. They share and swap ideas about how to beat AI detection so that they won't get caught. So, opportunities. What are our opportunities? So this is where I go back to the idea of 21st century skills. And one of the cornerstones of 21st century skills is critical thinking. We need to get our students learning and thinking critically. So one of the approaches that I use is, instead of using the KWL, I use what is known as the KWHLAQ, which is the 21st century version of KWL. KWL is 20th century. It's old, okay? This one is the 21st century version, and if I click on this, it'll take us to another Padlet. And I'm happy to share these slides with anyone who'd like them. So what I did is I took my notes from the article that I showed you previously, that I talked about previously, and I reorganized them into KWHLAQ. So I copied the Padlet, I changed the format of the Padlet so that it would have columns with headings, and I moved things around. So these are the problems and the definitions. This is the background information. What do I know? This is what I want to know, okay? Then how am I going to learn more about these things? So after reading this, I've learned that these things all exist from the systematic review. But where will I go to learn about them? Well, these are the sources that the article had referenced, so I can start with these ones and go and look at them. So it's going beyond the text, not just what's in that text, but where did they get their ideas from? What was the context behind those? Can I verify that they represented it correctly, right? And find sources on critical literacy, which is something I'm going to talk about soon. Then in action, opportunities for more research, and under questions, what critical AI literacy skills do our students already have when entering our program? What AI tools do they already know how to use? What do students understand about the intersection of AI and academic integrity? I don't have answers to that yet, right? And the research on AI in EIP is really only just beginning. And there's very few things that have gone through publication cycle. So these will be things that I'm hoping to see more of and hopefully going to engage in some of the research as well. Oh, back. There we go. So there's this new literacy definition, which now includes critical AI literacy. And what is critical AI literacy? It is, do students know how to use AI? Do they understand how it works? And can they evaluate it? And a large part about that is ethics, not just in academic integrity, but also the ethics of some of these tools require you to upload files which are copyrighted, which our students don't own the right to share, which are behind paywalls normally. And so is it ethical for them to be loading these up? Is it ethical for them to be sharing these sources for training the AI when they don't have the right to actually share them, right? So talking a little bit about this critical AI literacy with our students and training them on that is going to become a part of our lives in the very near future. What I'd like to see is us gradually moving to turning the AI as no longer a threat, but an opportunity for learning. That does not mean that we jump right in and we start training our students on how to use it to bypass critical reading. Absolutely not. It becomes an additional learning outcome. But if we go, sorry, go back. My final Padlet here. There we go. So I've created some of the AI tools that I know our students are already using. If you're not familiar with them, you might want to explore some of these links. I also have these resources for learning more. So things from the European Network of Academic Integrity, some information. Now, they don't call it plagiarism. They call it unauthorized generative content. Okay, so they have a slightly different term for it. So this content generation, sorry, unauthorized content generation, I've got that mixed up. So UCG. Dr. Sarah Eaton at the University of Calgary is one of the experts on writing academic ethically. She has blog posts. And so this is one of the areas I know that she's researching and looking at now is the use of Gen AI. She's on Twitter if you want to follow her. She's quite active. And then we have the Telsec Balleap webinars, which many of those have focused on using AI and talking to students about the ethical use of AI. Again, we have, with Perusall, if you are using Perusall, you can actually generate very good discussion questions using their AI. So, you know, if the students are using it, we could be using it as well to get our students talking about these. And Perusall's good because it will actually connect it to other texts that they've been looking at within your course. Cathoven is one for developing reading comprehension questions. So these are things that we can use. Then I have some things, sources on critical AI literacy to learn more about it, and ideas for critical reading or AI. And this is where I'm going to finish my last 4 minutes. Do I have? Okay, so the number one recommendation for critical reading is read without digital tools. Okay. So this past year, the fall semester, I tried to have my students read with Perusall. And for many, many reasons, it was just an unmitigated disaster, and I will admit that. But one of the things was the students were reading largely through translation. They were cutting and pasting things into translators. They weren't talking to each other. They weren't engaging with each other. trying to do it quickly. Okay. And so they weren't really thinking things through necessarily the way that they should have. The second semester, I made them put their computers away during reading lessons and read from the text. And we had a couple of really excellent lessons as a result, where we were able to talk about genre, about the author's purpose, about their bias, their assumptions, and really engage with the texts in a much more meaningful way. Now, granted, this was second semester, so they were probably better prepared to do that. But this is something that I'm quite keen on having them do more of, so that they spend more time thinking about the meaning without relying on dictionaries, thesauruses, translation tools. There's a place for that, but not necessarily in every single lesson. Collaborative long-term reading. I'd like to have students engage with a text several times over a period of a few weeks, where they go back to the same reading and they look at it through a different viewpoint, a different perspective, different questions, connecting it to other texts. Then, in terms of the AI, I'd like to start talking about AI and critical literacy. One of the things that I had was we are going to be doing this new integrated skills exam this year. And I thought, okay, getting students to write summaries where they themselves write the summary, but there's a point to it, not just produce a summary, but produce keywords for a summary and put it into an AI tool and generate images. So if we go back to my presentation, I will leave the rest of those. But if I go back to my presentation and we look at some of the images, these images were all generated with an AI generator using my abstract for today. Okay. So they could then show the images that they picked and discuss which one they thought was the best synopsis of the actual text. Okay, that's the end. Do we have time for questions? No, thank you. My apologies to you all.